All right, guys. I wanted to spend a little time talking about World War I, and when we're out of school, it's hard to do it. And so I wanted to talk about why World War I was so deadly. And it's getting a little dark for a second. Hopefully my phone camera can keep up. All right. Anyway, World War I is regarded as one of the deadliest wars in history. World War II was a little bit more deadly, but World War II was spread out over a huge area. World War I was fought in very small areas, and psychologically that just had an enormous impact on the soldiers who had to fight in it. So let's take a look at what the guys who fought in this war had to go through. And I wanted to start by just showing where does the United States fit in compared to the other countries that fought in the war in terms of losses. And in terms of military deaths in the war, the United States is surprisingly far down the list. There's Germany, number one, over 2 million. And then we're going to go through Russia, number two, 1.8 million. And coming in number three, France, almost 1.4 million. So those are pretty big numbers. I think that's even France is more than the population of Palm Beach County. It's significant. So we'll keep going. There's 4, Austria-Hungary. 5, Britain, still over 1 million. And finally we get to Ottoman Turkey, which is close to 3/4 million. At least they're under 1 million military deaths. Italy, over 500,000. Romania, still ahead of the United States, over 3/4 million. And then Serbia, a little closer to 3/4 million. And finally, way down in number 10, United States, with only 117,000. Now, only 117,000 is shocking numbers to the American public. Okay. Now, I have said that the Civil War was the bloodiest war in American history, and it was, but the Civil War took 4 years, and we lost 117,000 in just 1 year. So, 1 year and 7 months. So let's talk about some big battles. The biggest battle of World War I is called the Battle of Verdun, and it cost 143,000, 163,000 German and French lives. It's a lot. Compare that to the biggest battle of the American Civil War, Gettysburg. Well, neither one even gets to 5,000. And you might say, well, wait a minute, Mr. Wheeler, Verdun, that took months. Gettysburg was only a 2-day battle. How's that fair? Well, here's 1 day's action. Battle of the Somme. The British went in on the first day of battle. They lost 26,000 men. That is mostly British, some French also. We're not sure how many Germans, but about 7,500 we think. Antietam, less than 3,000, considerably less than 2,500 apiece. And that was the bloodiest single day in American history. So in terms of the volume of death and destruction, World War I for such a small area is hard to match. And in order to understand this, you just got to get your head wrapped around one idea, and that is that the technology of the attack was not equal to the technology of the defense. It was much, much easier to defend your trench and just let them come to you and then just blast them. Attacking was much, much harder, and that's how a lot of guys lost their lives. So we think of a trench like this, and it's not bad. It's a trench. They're standing in there, and they're all protected. But actually, the reality was a little tougher. Another model trench. It looks. This is actually a model that was built by somebody to look sort of like a World War I trench cross-section, but the reality was it was often more like this, deep in mud, and in that mud all the time you could get terrible infections in wet shoes, not able to get your feet dry and clean. And this is a PSA poster from World War II, but you get the idea. This was considered a serious hazard. And they lost a lot of guys who had to leave the combat area because their feet were no good. Of course, worse than trench foot was trench mouth. Your teeth could just start falling right out of your head. They had terrible hygiene. You didn't have a chance to clean yourself. They had lice. They had all kinds of problems in the trenches. All that was bad, but actual fighting was a lot worse. So if you had to make an attack, you're going to have to come up out of your trenches and cross all this open ground called no man's land, the area between my trench and your trench. And there's going to be shell craters, sometimes full of water and lots of mud, barbed wire, and finally you get to the trench and you're going to have to fight for it. There's going to be the enemy in that trench, and it could be hand-to-hand combat in the trench. And if you can take the trench, there's another trench. Just to give you an idea of how complicated it could be, this is an aerial shot that the British took. And look at all the squiggly lines. These are all trench lines. You could really get lost out there if you were trying to make an attack in the dark or in the fog. You might think you're leaving your trenches only to come back into your own trenches. It was very difficult to fight in these conditions. So what really killed people? Well, heavy artillery killed a lot of people. And they actually started the war without proper helmets. A lot of them died of head injuries early on until they got outfitted better. But heavy artillery, including some that threw some really big shells, killed a lot of guys. And this could get you at any time. And they would often really try to flatten sections of trenches if they wanted to make an attack. Of course, World War I is notorious for two things: the gas warfare, you see this, the masks on, but also machine guns. And you could flatten the trenches and blast those guys out of there, but eventually the heavy guns stop and the guys with machine guns come back and they set up and they will mow your guys down when you make that attack. If the machine guns didn't get you, maybe a guy with a rifle would. A guy with a rifle could kill you at a half a mile. They are fully modern weapons at this point. They're basically the same as a hunting rifle. And back to gas warfare, one of the worst things that happened in World War I, although not very effective at winning the war, was gas. And one of the worst was called mustard gas, and it would cause these horrible burns. If you breathed it, it burned your lungs. If you got it in your face and eyes, it could blind you. If it got on your skin, it caused horrible blisters. If you fell into water, it could dissolve in the water, and you could have it soaking into your clothes and blister your whole body. It was horrible stuff. And of course, the barbed wire. You could be trapped out there and not be able to free yourself. And if it's only this much barbed wire, it doesn't seem so bad, but how about like this? It's a forest of barbed wire. It's so much barbed wire, you can't even tell what this is a picture of. And they had developed tanks during the war to try to break this trench warfare stalemate. But the engines aren't good enough. They don't have the design elements down right. Tanks just aren't up to it yet. And so there's nothing to do except go over the top, make your attack, and suffer your losses. I hope that helps us understand how bad this was and what a searing experience it was for U.S. troops. Thank you very much, and see you next time.